I never believed in ghosts. I always thought stories of hauntings were just exaggerations, ways to scare kids or add excitement to sleepovers. But the truth about the unknown is that it doesn't need your belief to exist. It just waits. And when you realize it's there, it's already too late. I know no one will believe this, but I need to tell it. I need to leave this recorded in case something happens to me or if someone ever encounters what I did so they'll know what happened. It's a secret I've kept for so long, but I can't live with it anymore. Please, if you end up reading this, help me before it's too late. I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through. When I was a kid, I didn't think about the consequences of my actions. Back then it was just fun. My cousins and I were always looking for things to do during the holidays, something that would keep us away from our mothers. My mom always told us not to touch her things, but it was exactly those things we were most interested in. Among so many items stored in her cabinets, we found something that would catch our attention. A Ouija board. It wasn't like the ones we saw on TV or in movies. It was an old board made of dark wood with letters that seemed to be hand-carved, in an almost illegible alphabet and strange symbols around the edges. It was as if time had made that board even more loaded with mystery. I knew my mom kept it very carefully, but as a child, I always had that feeling that the forbidden things were more attractive. That night we were alone at home. We decided it was the perfect moment to find out what that board could do. We didn't know much about the game, but we had heard things about it. Talking to spirits seemed fun, like it was just a game. After all, no one believes in that stuff, right? I was the first to grab the board hidden in my mom's cabinet at the back where she kept old things. When I held it, I felt something strange. It was heavy, as if the board itself was trying to repel me. But I ignored that feeling and called my cousins to play. They were all excited, wanting to see if the spirit would answer our questions. The room was lit only by candles, which flickered with the weak wind, and the sound of the wood under our feet seemed to amplify our anxiety. Our hearts beat faster as the silence of the night took over. I wasn't so sure anymore that it was a good idea. Something inside me told me to stop, but curiosity, the thrill of doing something so forbidden, pushed me forward. We sat around the board, all of us with our fingers on the glass planchette. It was cold, colder than it should have been. The weight of the board seemed to press down on us. It was as if it was watching us, waiting for us to make the first move. The atmosphere was heavy, dense, as if the house itself was aware of what we were about to do. I looked at my cousins and I could see the nervousness reflected on their faces. Even so, all of us were determined to continue. So was I. We had nothing to lose, right? We started with the obvious question, is anyone there? The glass piece moved slowly, almost unwillingly, until it stopped at yes. The cold in the room increased. A shiver ran down my spine and I quickly looked at my cousins. They were just as stunned as I was, but none of us said anything. Our hands were frozen, unable to move or question what was happening. I tried to laugh like it was a joke, but I couldn't. Something was wrong. I thought it was just nervousness. But when we asked more questions, the answers became clearer and clearer. The piece moved with precision, without hesitation. It was as if something was controlling our movements, guiding us to where it wanted us to go. We started to get excited about the game. We asked silly questions like about the future, who would be the first to get married, kid stuff. The board answered, but each time with answers that seemed wrong. No one was really controlling the piece. It was as if an invisible force, a presence beyond our understanding, was at play. Then my cousin, who was always the boldest, asked, "Who is here?" The piece moved again, but with a frightening speed. It wasn't like before when it moved slowly. Now the pointer dragged quickly across the letters, until it stopped at something none of us could understand. Reappear. The air suddenly became dense. We couldn't breathe properly. The cold in the room intensified, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in seconds. I could see my cousin's breath, fogging in the freezing air. For a moment we all stared at each other, not knowing what to do. A deep silence took over us, broken only by the muffled sound of the wood creaking. The feeling that we were being watched was palpable. But at the same time, part of me was too terrified to stop. Curiosity still held me. "Ask more," one of my cousins whispered, her voice trembling. And once again we went on. We kept asking, not thinking about what we were really doing. From that moment on, the questions started to become more personal. "What do you want from us?" And again the pointer moved, not only quickly but with a force that seemed to pull us. It went straight to the word everything. The tension in the room exploded, and suddenly the candles blew out on their own. Everything went dark. The darkness seemed to swallow the room. The sound of our racing hearts was the only thing that stood out in that emptiness. My cousins were panicking, screaming, trying to light the candles again, but the darkness wouldn't dissipate. I was paralyzed, not knowing what to do. That's when I felt for the first time something I couldn't understand. Something was there in the room with us. I wasn't alone. But it wasn't a presence I recognized. It was as if something very old, very dangerous had been released, something that shouldn't have been touched. And before we could react, the door to the room burst open with a bang. My mom entered and her expression was pure terror. "I warned you," she said, her voice low, but filled with a tension I had never heard before. She looked at the board with silent rage, and in a swift movement she grabbed it from our hands and locked it in the cabinet. "You shouldn't have messed with this." But it was already too late. What was in the air, what had been unleashed, was beyond anyone's control. And from then on things began to go wrong. Things started happening that we couldn't explain. In the following days my life turned into a nightmare. My dad lost his job, and shortly after my mom was diagnosed with a serious illness. I started having nightmares every night. I couldn't sleep anymore. And things in the house began to get stranger and stranger. Every corner of the house seemed to carry an oppressive presence. I couldn't escape that feeling that something was watching me. And worst of all, my cousin, the one who had asked the question that brought us to that point, began to act strangely. She started walking around the house at night, her eyes glazed over as if in a trance. She wouldn't respond when we spoke to her, and her expression was empty, distant. When we could speak to her, she looked at us with terror in her eyes, as if she had seen something she couldn't explain. She disappeared without a trace, as if she had been taken by an invisible force. What happened after that was an ongoing nightmare. Not just with my cousin, but with all of us. My life, which had once been normal, started to disintegrate. When I looked back, I realized my mom was drifting further and further away from me. She was getting weaker, sicker, and my life was filled with losses. Everything seemed like a cycle of misfortune that couldn't be controlled, as if something was manipulating my reality. I distanced myself from my cousins. They too began to have unstable lives, always with something wrong happening, as if every move we made was cursed. The simplest things, like a smile or a moment of happiness, turned into something fleeting, quickly followed by another loss, another tragedy. I didn't know what to think anymore. And the worst part, the board wasn't with me anymore. But its shadow continued to haunt me. Sometimes, when I was alone, I'd feel as if someone was watching me, as if someone was waiting for me to finish the game that had never been completed. The fear I felt would always increase on stormy nights, and even the smallest noises would make me tremble with terror. Now, as an adult, the feeling never disappeared. The presence is always with me. I try to move forward, try to build a life, but I know something is watching me, something that will never let me go. Sometimes, panic takes over me, as if I'm about to be pulled back into that dark, cold place. I can't pretend everything is okay anymore. And that's why I'm writing here, hoping that someone who understands can help me. I can't live with this weight anymore. I know something is hunting me, waiting for me to ask one more question to continue what we started. I can't go on. I can't. But if you're reading this, if you found this message, please understand what happened and try to stop it before it happens again.